A very warm welcome back to your aviation news recap video, where my goal is to provide you with as many aviation news stories in an 8-minute window. Let's move on to the first topic. A significant strike that was slated to commence this weekend has been avoided, following WestJet and the Airline Pilot Association, or just simply ALPA, reaching a tentative agreement over a new contract. The ALPA represents the WestJet pilots, among others, and has made headlines in the past week as they seek better pay and scheduling. They were additionally looking towards narrowing the gap between their US counterparts in terms of overall quality in the job. While WestJet had already said they'd offered what they believed to be an improved contract to their pilots, this was turned down, and subsequently, the pilots were still looking at a mass walkout that, if went ahead, could have completely shut down the operations at WestJet. Interestingly enough, the demands laid out by the pilots did receive feedback from WestJet. WestJet very simply saying that their demands were unrealistic because WestJet is a Canadian airline, not one from the United States. This was all until the dying hours when an agreement was reached just before the deadline for the walkout. WestJet says they are thankful that a deal was reached, however are still very much aware of the implications that this will still have on their customers, as resuming operations will only take some time now. It could have been far worse though, it must be said. While WestJet was the focus on this side, aviation employees throughout Canada, and I guess you could really include more locations globally, continue to fight for better conditions and also seek representation from unions, in some cases too. Since the pandemic, the pressures on employees in roles have only increased. With shortages and the lack of ability to source fully qualified, trained professionals, we see multiple jobs placed on the shoulders of just one person. And yes, while maybe that one respective person can manage this for a certain period of time, eventually it all comes undone. And you can make the case that they shouldn't have been in that position to be doing that in the first place. Let's move on to Northern Pacific Airways, who have unfortunately delayed their launch for multiple weeks, following them being unable to obtain the required certification documents. The regulatory scheduling, the company says, is beyond its control. It intended to begin passenger flights from Ontario to Las Vegas on weekends in early June. In fact, that was only meant to be now 2 weeks away. These flights were to be operated with the 757, which have now been postponed. Discussion of the airline missing its launch date actually popped up a matter of weeks ago, when a source mentioned internally to me that there were rumblings around the safety and how they doubted the company would meet its launch. At that time, this was unconfirmed, and you can take a look at their Facebook pages to really get an idea for just how they're tracking. Northern Pacific Airways has really gone through a bit of an identity crisis, having been forced to shift its model multiple times since its conception. Initially, it targeted flights from Anchorage through to Asia on an Iceland Air-like model. However, the conflict breaking out with Ukraine and Russia prevented them from doing this. It then moved its strategy towards Mexico, before switching to potentially charter missions in the Pacific, then finally setting itself on Ontario to Vegas as a launch route from the beginning of June. Decisions such as these come also as the airline has a fleet ready. Nowhere though to fly the 757s is another problem. Ultimately, it must be said, safety comes first before anything else. And yes, it's definitely frustrating in multiple aspects, for the airline no doubt, but also those that had booked and were eager to fly on the first service. But these things can always happen with a new airline. We've seen that time and time again, especially right here in Australia with Bonza. Northern Pacific will now no doubt be doing everything they can to get the appropriate documents done before jetting off tentatively on June 23rd. To our next topic, and that's Royal Jordanian, who announced that they have selected the Embraer E2 family as part of their fleet renewal and expansion plans for the short-haul fleet. The airline is set to acquire 4 E190 E2s and 2 E195 E2s from Azora on a lease contract. Azora, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a commercial aircraft lessor, which provide leasing, financing, and also asset management to companies within the industry, while having a massive focus, they say, on regional operations, which is why they no doubt were very excited about the proposition to work with Royal Jordanian and these E2 jets. Meanwhile, Royal Jordanian also signed directly with Embraer for a further 2 of the E2s. At this stage, this contract with Embraer is simply an MOU, basically an understanding that they'll look to make it firm later down the line. Royal Jordanian adds that it will be expecting the addition of these Embraer jets towards the back end of the 2023 calendar year, so this year. The airline currently has 24 aircraft in service, with the fleet averaging an age of 13 years. It includes a host of Airbus narrowbody aircraft families from the 319 to the 320, even to the 321. For their long-haul fleet, they do operate exclusively with the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. And if you're not in the region where they operate these short-haul aircraft, you've probably had the opportunity to see the 787 Dreamliner at least once during your travels. On to our final story of the day, and it is with Air Canada, who have had a very, very busy couple of weeks, it must be said. They've unveiled a new partnership with flydubai to boost connectivity between Canada and the Middle East, with also a focus on expanding their presence in East Africa, India, and the southern part of Asia. While subject to regulatory approval, once completed, Air Canada's code will be placed on a reported 9 routes, with the ambition to grow this with the flydubai network. These routes will originate out of Dubai. The connection between Canada and the Middle East, especially just generally the UAE, has only been strengthening recently. As we know, Air Canada announced service to Dubai from Vancouver in British Columbia, and Emirates were promoting a non-stop Montreal service. Comments from the Executive Vice President of Revenue and Network Planning at Air Canada said, Air Canada is very pleased to partner with flydubai, further expanding our connectivity to the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent, a growing source of immigration and travel to Canada. This new partnership is a perfect complement to Air Canada's non-stop service to Dubai from Toronto and Vancouver, and growing our relationship with Emirates, flyDubai's codeshare partner. The companies say announcements should come later this year for those that may be intrigued as to what this means for loyalty program members. flydubai also went on to add that they are pleased with Air Canada joining the long list of partners for the airline. They believe this will improve the travel experience massively for both sets of customers. That's going to conclude today's aviation news recap. If you have any thoughts on the stories covered, you're more than welcome to drop them down below in the comments, whether that be related to the WestJet strike, Northern Pacific Airways delaying their launch date once more, maybe looking towards Royal Jordanian, and then placing an order for the E2 family of aircraft, or very much lastly, Air Canada and their fantastic new partnership with flydubai. Thank you very much for watching, take care and be safe, and I will indeed see you next time for more coverage on the aviation industry.